Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we're bringing you 8 chilling wilderness horror stories, each one a true tale of isolation, fear, and the unexplainable. From strange figures in ranger uniforms, to cabins that were never really empty, to the key that didn't belong to us. These stories will make you think twice before heading into the woods alone. Because in the wild, it's not just the animals watching you. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Man in the Woodshed. I was 15 the summer my parents decided to leave me and my younger brothers with Grandma Ruth while they took a rare anniversary trip to Oregon. Her cabin sat alone at the end of a gravel road in northern Montana, just outside of Glacier National Park. You couldn't see another house for miles. The closest gas station was nearly 40 minutes away, and the cabin didn't have Wi-Fi or cell service, just a landline phone and a shortwave radio that hadn't worked in years. But it was beautiful in its own way. Surrounded by tall evergreens and a sky so clear you could see the Milky Way. At night, it felt like stepping into a forgotten postcard. Grandma Ruth was in her late 70s, but she still chopped her own firewood and made her famous berry jam every August. She called the place her fortress of peace, and honestly, I believed her. I didn't mind being unplugged. My brothers Jake and Levi were 9 and 12. And the three of us spent our first day exploring the property, building forts out of logs and skipping rocks across the pond behind the shed. It felt like summer was finally slowing down. None of us knew what was really out there watching. That evening, after dinner and card games by the fireplace, we helped Grandma lock up. She was old school about it. Deadbolts on both doors, blinds pulled tight, and always checking the shed. The woodshed sat maybe 40 yards from the house, a squat wooden structure with a slanted tin roof and a single yellow bulb above the door. Grandma said bears sometimes came sniffing around for leftover scraps in the compost bin beside it, so we made sure it was latched. Jake asked if he could go grab a flashlight from the shed for stargazing. Grandma shook her head firmly. Not at night, she said. You never know what's out there. Her voice wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, serious. Something about the way she said it made me glance over my shoulder as we turned in for the night. The next morning, I woke up first. The air smelled like pine and dew. I stepped outside with my book, hoping to read in the sun. That's when I noticed the shed door was open. Not wide open, but enough to see the darkness inside. The yellow bulb was off, swinging slightly. I walked back inside to ask Grandma if she'd been out there already, but she was still in her robe making oatmeal. When I pointed it out, she paused. Her spoon hovered mid-stir. I was sure I'd closed it last night, she said. Maybe the wind, I nodded. But the air was still. Too still. Later that afternoon, while Jake and Levi chased each other in the yard, I walked past the shed again. There were muddy footprints near the door, fresh ones. But none of us had worn boots that morning, and they were too big to be ours. That night, something felt off. We went through the same routine dinner dishes, locked the doors, but Grandma checked the shed twice. Once before sunset, once after dark. I asked her if she was worried, and she just muttered something about strangers and kept her eyes on the tree line. Around midnight, I woke up to a noise, a creak, faint but sharp, like a door hinge. I sat up in bed, heart thudding. Jake and Levi were asleep on the floor in their sleeping bags. I crept to the window and looked out toward the shed. The light above it was on again, swaying slowly, casting a sickly yellow glow. The door was wide open. Something moved inside. Just a shadow, but it shifted unnaturally, like someone ducking. I backed away, breath caught in my throat. I tiptoed to Grandma's room and knocked softly. She was already awake, fully dressed. She met my eyes and whispered, "You saw it too, didn't you?" I nodded. Without a word, she pulled the landline off the hook and began dialing. But there was no dial tone, just silence. Cold, humming silence. And the light in the shed kept swinging like it was being watched from inside. Grandma didn't hesitate. She pulled open the drawer beside the phone and took out an old revolver, and the kind I'd only ever seen in westerns. Her hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. She told me to wake my brothers and stay in the hallway, no arguments. I did as she said, whispering to Jake and Levi until they blinked awake, groggy and confused. We sat on the floor with our backs against the wall while Grandma stood by the front door peeking through the curtain. The shed light kept swaying its yellow glow, pulsing faintly through the trees. Then it went out, just like that. 1 second there, the next gone. I barely breathed. A few minutes passed. Then we heard it footsteps, crunching leaves, slow, deliberate. Not an animal, not someone rushing. Just one step after another, coming closer to the house. Grandma raised the revolver, finger poised, but not trembling. The footsteps stopped. We waited. Nothing. Then came a soft knock. Not at the front door, at the side, the kitchen door. 3 slow taps. Grandma whispered my name. "Wyatt." I nodded. She mouthed, "Crawl to the den. Get to the back window. Take your brothers and go if I tell you." My legs felt like stone, but I grabbed Levi's hand and nudged Jake toward the hallway. That's when the knock came again. Louder, closer, like a fist now. Then the doorknob jiggled. Once, twice, and then stopped. Silence returned. It stretched on too long. Grandma stepped to the doorframe, eyes locked on the knob. A beat. Then she flung the door open, gun raised, and no one was there. Just the porch light buzzing. But something had changed. The muddy boots we'd seen earlier, they were now sitting on the welcome mat. And inside them, upright and empty, were 2 pine cones, stacked neatly like someone had been trying to make them look like feet. A message or a warning. Grandma shut the door hard and locked every bolt. No more phone, no more landline. And we weren't alone. The next morning, Grandma packed us into her old pickup truck just after sunrise. None of us had slept. She didn't say much, just that we were going into town and not coming back until someone checked the property. At the ranger station 20 miles out, she told the deputy everything. He listened carefully, but didn't take notes until she mentioned the boots and pine cones. Then he called for backup. 3 officers drove out with her while we waited in town at the diner. 2 hours later, she returned with a pale face and tight lips. The deputy confirmed the shed had been used recently. Old food wrappers, footprints in the dust, and signs someone had been sleeping in the corner beneath a tarp. But whoever it was, they were gone. No forced entry, no signs of violence, no fingerprints. Just a name scratched into the underside of the woodshed table, Bran. No last name, no matches in the system. They called it vagrancy. Grandma called it trespassing. I called it something else entirely. Because someone had been inside with us. Quiet, patient, waiting. After that summer, we never stayed at Grandma's cabin again. She didn't sell it, said she wouldn't let fear drive her off, but she changed. She stopped calling it her fortress of peace. She installed motion lights, a new fence, and metal bars over the windows. Even in daylight, she kept a rifle nearby. I used to love that place. Now I can't think about it without seeing that shed door swinging or hearing those footsteps in the dark. I still wonder how long he was out there before we noticed. Days, weeks, did he watch us through the windows while we played? I check every lock twice now. I listen too closely to every creak at night. And sometimes when I'm camping or walking near the woods, I think about those pine cones in the boots, how carefully he arranged them, how quiet he had to be. Not to scare us, not to rob us, just to be near, just to remind us we were never really alone. Story 2. He didn't press a trail marker. I was 17 when my best friend Clara and I signed up for a week-long outdoor leadership program in Oregon's Cascade Mountains. It was supposed to be a mix of trail navigation training group hikes and nights under the stars. Our parents thought it would be good for college applications. We just wanted to get away from home and spend time in the woods. The base camp was tucked beside a glacier-fed lake, surrounded by towering evergreens and mossy boulders. There were cabins for staff, but participants slept in tents set up along the shoreline. No phones allowed. No electricity past the main lodge. Just trail maps, compasses, and the sound of birds in the morning. The first 2 days were exactly what we hoped for. We made friends roasted marshmallows over fire pits and even saw a bald eagle circling the ridge one morning. Clara and I shared a tent near the edge of camp, close enough to hear the wind ripple across the lake. It felt safe. Still wild, but safe. On the third day, we hiked the East Loop as a group, then had free time to explore. Clara wanted to nap. I wanted to take pictures. So I grabbed my camera and map and followed the forest trail alone. The trail curved gently uphill, winding through tall ferns and fallen logs. Sunlight filtered in patches through the trees, and the air smelled like damp pine and cool earth. I paused now and then to take photos of tree bark or distant peaks peeking through the canopy. Maybe 20 minutes in, I passed a trail marker nailed to a tree. It was red-shaped, like an arrow, pointing left towards something called Raven's Point. I hadn't heard of it in orientation, but curiosity pulled me that way. The trail narrowed and sloped downward routes, crossing underfoot like veins. That was when I heard footsteps, not animal sounds, human. I glanced back and saw a man maybe in his 30s wearing a gray fleece jacket and a green backpack. He nodded slightly as we passed each other. I offered a polite smile and kept moving. A few minutes later, I stopped at an overlook where the trail opened to a rocky ledge above a rushing stream. I took a few pictures, then turned back. The man was there again, this time behind me. No sound, no footsteps, just standing, watching. I pretended not to notice and started walking back toward camp, picking up my pace. I reached the main trail and followed the signs toward the gondola lift that ran between base camp and the upper ridge. As I reached the platform, I saw the man again, standing casually near the edge, sunglasses pushed up into his hair. He followed me into the gondola without a word. I pressed the button for base camp. He didn't press anything. Just stood there, silent, no movement. And he smiled. The gondola shuddered as it began its slow descent toward base camp, the forest stretching endlessly beneath us. I kept my eyes on the glass, pretending to admire the view, but every cell in my body was alert. The man stood a few feet behind me, hands in his jacket pockets, gaze fixed somewhere near the back of my head. I tried to stay calm. Maybe he was just going back to camp like I was. Maybe it was nothing. But when I stole a glance at the control panel, I noticed something that turned my stomach. He hadn't scanned a pass. Everyone was supposed to scan in to use the lift. I had. He hadn't. He wasn't carrying a staff lanyard either. Just a green backpack and that same unsettling calm. As we neared the landing platform, I took a step toward the door, heart racing. The moment the doors opened, I bolted down the ramp without looking back. I didn't run, not exactly, but I walked fast, pretending I was late for something. I only looked once over my shoulder, and he was still there, stepping off the gondola, slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. I made it back to the main lodge just as the late afternoon sun dipped low behind the tree line. The camp director and 2 counselors were on the porch sipping coffee and laughing about something. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell them that a man had followed me down the trail, ridden the gondola, without scanning, stood too close, too quiet. But the words stuck in my throat. What if I was wrong? What if he really was just another guest or a local hiker? I ducked inside, found Clara in our tent, and told her I had a weird feeling that maybe we shouldn't sleep by the lake tonight. She didn't question it. She knew me. That evening, we asked to move into one of the indoor bunk rooms inside the lodge due to a sprained ankle I made up. They let us switch. Just before lights out, I stepped into the hallway to brush my teeth. That's when I saw him again. Down the hallway near the emergency exit, his green backpack slung over one shoulder. He wasn't supposed to be inside, not unless he was staff or in a bunk room. He wasn't wearing a wristband. He didn't look lost. He looked like he belonged. And then he smiled. Not friendly, not curious. Just calm, cold, like he knew I was watching. I stepped backward into the bunk room and quietly turned the lock. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I reported everything. The trail, the gondola, the hallway, the missing wristband. The program director took it seriously. They reviewed the entry logs. No one matching my description was signed in that week. Security checked the gondola footage. He was there, just as I said. They searched the grounds and found a camp set up in the woods about a half-mile past the property line. Inside it, a notebook, pages of names, ages, descriptions. Mine was on the list, twice. Once in red ink, once in black. The police arrived by mid-morning, 2 deputies from the county sheriff's office and a forest ranger. They swept the woods, checked every trailhead, and combed through the makeshift camp. The man was gone. No sign of him except for the notebook, an empty water jug, and a pair of worn hiking boots tucked neatly beside a sleeping bag. No fingerprints, no ID, no trash. The notebook had over 20 entries, mostly girls' names with notes like quiet hikes alone or usually near lake. My name was the only one written twice. One officer said it might have been a drifter. Another thought maybe he had watched previous groups for weeks, slipping between programs, moving campsites each time. They filed a report, took my statement, and said they would keep patrol cars closer to the trail entrance for the rest of the summer. But that was it. No arrest, no photo, no face to put with the fear. The man who didn't press a trail marker had vanished into the trees like he had never existed. But I knew better. Because someone had been watching me from the moment I stepped off the trail. I never went back to the Cascades after that. Clara and I finished the program, but something shifted in me. I used to love hiking alone, the silence, the freedom. Now I jump at the sound of branches snapping. I scan every tree line, every overlook. I stopped using trail apps that share your location. I stopped trusting open paths. It's been over a year, and I still wake up some nights with the image of him in that gondola. Not speaking, not blinking, just there. I think about that notebook sometimes. How many other names were in it? How long he had been watching? I still don't know what he wanted. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I do know this. When someone steps into your space without saying a word, without needing anything, that silence is louder than any scream. Because it means they've already chosen you. Story 3. The empty cabin next door wasn't empty. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend in the Catskills. Just me and Danny, my girlfriend of 3 years, celebrating her birthday in a little Airbnb tucked deep in the woods. The listing called it a secluded couple's retreat, complete with a wood stove, clawfoot tub, and 2 wraparound porches overlooking the forest. The property had 2 cabins about 50 feet apart, one newer and one older, but we were told the second one was empty and locked for maintenance. That suited us fine. We wanted privacy. No neighbors, no noise, no signal. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The air smelled like wood smoke and leaves, and the only sounds were distant birds and the creak of the porch steps under our boots. Inside the cabin was small but cozy stone fireplace, string lights, blankets folded at the foot of the bed. Donnie unpacked while I stacked firewood near the stove. We cooked a simple dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and stayed up late playing cards by lantern light. That night, lying in bed with the window cracked open, I listened to the wind rustling through the trees and thought, for the first time in months, I feel completely at peace. The next morning started with the sound of birds and sunlight cutting through the blinds. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee, still barefoot, and looked toward the second cabin. It sat quiet, its windows dark and the wood faded and chipped near the corners. The front door was shut tight, just like we'd seen it the night before. I almost didn't notice the footprints. They were faint, but there, patches in the frost-covered grass that curved around from the back of the structure. Too large to be ours, too recent. I told myself it was probably a maintenance worker or the property owner doing a late check-in. Danny was still asleep, so I didn't say anything. We spent most of that afternoon hiking a short trail behind the property and picnicking by a frozen creek. But when we got back near sunset, something felt different. The curtains in the second cabin looked slightly parted, only by an inch or two, like someone had been looking out. I stared at them a long time while Danny went inside to start dinner. Eventually, I convinced myself the wind had done it. That night, the temperature dropped fast. The fire crackled low while we ate by candlelight. At one point, Danny paused and tilted her head. "Did you hear that?" I listened. A soft knock. Not at our door, but from somewhere outside. Then nothing. No wind. No footsteps. Just quiet. I walked to the porch and looked toward the empty cabin. Still dark. Still shut. But as I turned back to go inside, I noticed something small on our porch railing. A single coin. Weathered, cold, and standing on its edge, perfectly balanced. I picked up the coin and held it in my palm. It was old, maybe foreign, with markings I didn't recognize. The surface was worn smooth edges, dulled by time. I looked around, but saw nothing in the trees. No movement, no sound. Just frost beginning to creep across the porch steps. I slipped the coin into my pocket and went back inside, locking the door behind me. Danny asked what I'd been staring at, and I told her it was nothing. Just a weird coin someone probably left behind. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the floorboards made me tense. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to use the bathroom. As I passed the window that faced the second cabin, I paused. The curtains were closed now, all the way shut. I knew what I'd seen earlier. They'd been parted, slightly open. Now, no gap at all. And something else caught my eye. A flicker of light inside the cabin. Dim and brief, like a candle being snuffed. I stood there for a long time, not breathing, not blinking, and for the first time since we arrived, I felt watched. The next morning, I told Danny what I saw. The coin, the light, the curtains. She frowned and said, maybe someone was squatting in the empty cabin. We debated calling the host, but I hesitated. What would I say? That a curtain moved and I found an old coin. There was no real evidence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong. That afternoon, we went for another walk along the creek, and when we came back, I noticed something chilling. The front door of the second cabin was slightly ajar. Not wide open, just enough to show darkness beyond. We hadn't touched it. No one had checked in. I stepped off our porch and walked toward it, heart thudding with every step. Donnie stayed back watching from behind the screen door. The ground near the cabin was damp, and fresh boot prints trailed up the steps. I reached the porch, called out, but got no answer. I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust, and something sweeter like rotting fruit. The cabin was nearly empty. A table, 2 chairs, an old sofa. And in the center of the room, directly under the light fixture, was a stack of small objects. Coins. Dozens of them, all standing on edge, carefully balanced into a ring. In the center of the circle sat a worn backpack. I recognized it immediately. It was mine, the one I kept in the back of our rental car. I backed out fast, heart racing, slamming the door shut behind me. When I turned, Danny was already outside holding her phone. She had just gotten signal 1 bar and was calling the host. While she explained the situation, I opened the car. My backpack was gone. The trunk had been opened sometime that day without a single alarm, and whoever had taken it hadn't stolen anything. They had simply placed it in the cabin, surrounded it with coins, and left the door open for us. The host called the sheriff immediately and told us to stay inside with the doors locked. It took nearly an hour for a deputy to arrive, a middle-aged man in a tan jacket with tired eyes, who didn't seem surprised when we told him everything. He checked the second cabin, took photos of the coins, and bagged my backpack for prints. Then he sat with us on the porch and said this wasn't the first report. A few weeks earlier, another couple had cut their trip short after hearing whispers outside their window. No forced entry, no damage. Just signs someone had been nearby, watching, listening. The deputy said he would file a report, but unless someone was caught inside the property, there wasn't much else they could do. As we packed up our things, I asked if he thought it was a squatter. He shrugged. Maybe. But that coin circle, that was ritualistic, he said. Not random. Not something you stumble into. And the worst part, there were no footprints leading away from the second cabin. Just the ones we left behind. We left before dark that same day. Neither of us said much during the drive, just stared out the windows as the forest slipped past. Donnie hasn't booked an Airbnb since. I don't go anywhere without checking every lock twice, sometimes 3 times. I kept one of the coins, not because I wanted to, but because I found it in my coat pocket a week later, perfectly upright in the center of my dresser. We had emptied our bags the night we got home. Was it already there? Or did someone follow us? Sometimes, I wonder if the second cabin was ever truly empty, or if it had just been waiting, watching, measuring the moment. We thought we were alone in the woods, wrapped in the silence and pine. But now I know some silences aren't peaceful. They're patient. Story 4. The Dead Thing Beneath the Floorboards. We booked the cabin for our honeymoon a week in a quiet lakeside lodge tucked deep in the woods of Vermont. No tourists, no phones, just the sound of water and the scent of pine in the air. The photos online showed wide porches, a private dock, and hand-carved furniture. It felt rustic but romantic, the kind of place that made you want to slow down and breathe. The cabin we got was the oldest one on the property, built in the 1940s with original flooring and a wood-burning stove in the corner. The owner, a quiet man named Ellis, handed us the keys at check-in and told us we had the whole cove to ourselves. My wife Leah was thrilled. She unpacked candles and books, hung her flannel by the fireplace, and smiled like she'd been waiting years to get here. The first night we sat by the lake, drinking cider, our feet dangling over the edge of the dock. I remember how calm it felt, like the rest of the world had disappeared. We went to bed with the windows cracked open and the fire still glowing low. I fell asleep thinking this was exactly how I wanted to start our life together. The next morning, the air felt colder inside than it did outside. I figured it was just the old insulation, maybe the stove had gone out. Leah was still asleep, so I slipped on a hoodie and went to relight the fire. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just something sour under the scent of smoke and pine. Not strong, not overwhelming, just wrong. Like wet cloth left too long in a corner. I opened a few windows and figured it was nothing. Maybe something had spilled near the stove. We spent the day hiking a nearby trail, spotting deer prints in the mud and skimming stones on the lake. By the time we got back, the cabin was warm again, cozy. I forgot all about the smell. But that night, it returned. Stronger, not mold, not smoke, something metallic. Leah noticed it first. She wrinkled her nose halfway through brushing her hair and said it smelled like old pennies in rot. I checked the fridge, the sink, under the bed. Nothing. The scent seemed to hover in one spot near the fireplace, thickest by the floor vent closest to the corner. I pressed my hand near the boards. They were cool even with the fire burning. Too cool. That night, we both had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard something beneath us. Not movement exactly, more like a low hum of breathing through wood. Leah told me I was imagining it. I almost believed her. Until the third night when I finally decided to look. It was just after midnight when I got up. Leah was asleep, curled into a blanket with her book still open on the nightstand. The smell was worse than ever, thick and coppery, like rusted nails soaked in vinegar. I grabbed a flashlight and crouched near the floor vent, where the scent seemed strongest. The old grate came up with a loud creak, revealing a narrow space between the floorboards and the subfloor, no more than 6 inches deep. I angled the light and peered inside. At first, I saw nothing but dust and old insulation. Then the beam caught something pale, wedged between the beams. I leaned closer. It was a face. Eyes open, lifeless, staring up through the cracks. The skin was bloated, mottled. One cheek pressed hard against a joist. A strand of hair curled across the forehead, like it had been placed there. I dropped the flashlight and scrambled back, heart hammering. The beam spun across the room, landing on Leah, still asleep. I didn't wake her. I just sat there, shaking eyes locked on the grate. The face hadn't moved, but I knew it was real, and I knew we weren't alone in that cabin. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in the armchair by the window, flashlight in my lap, waiting for the sun to come up. Every creak in the cabin felt louder. Every gust of wind sounded like it came from under the floor. I kept thinking about the face, the way the eyes stared upward, as if they had been watching us all along. At first light, I woke Leah. I didn't tell her everything, just that something was wrong, that we needed to leave right away. She didn't argue. She packed quickly while I called Ellis, the owner. When he answered, I told him about the smell and the vent. I left out the face. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then he said, "I'll be there in an hour. Don't touch anything." I didn't like the way he said it. We waited outside on the porch bags by our feet, the morning air sharp with frost. Ellis pulled up exactly 1 hour later in an old green truck. He barely looked at us, just nodded, and walked into the cabin with a small tool bag. We followed him to the living room. He knelt beside the vent, shined a small light inside, and stared for a long time. I watched his face. It didn't show shock. It showed something else, recognition. He stood slowly and wiped his hands on a rag. "It's an old problem," he said. "We've had animals get in before. Squirrels, raccoons. Nothing to worry about." But there was fear behind his eyes. And when I offered to call the police, he refused. "I'll take care of it," he said too quickly. "Just leave the key and go." We didn't argue. We drove in silence for hours. And that night in a motel 2 states away, I pulled the flashlight from my bag and stared at the grime still on the handle. I never saw the face again. But in the photo roll of my camera, tucked between lake shots and trail markers, was one picture I never took: dark floorboards and 2 pale eyes staring directly into the lens. The next morning, I called the Vermont State Police from our motel room. I didn't tell Leah until after I'd already filed the report. I gave them the lodge name, the address, and what I had seen beneath the floorboards. I also emailed them the photo, the one I hadn't taken. 2 days later, a detective called me back. They had visited the property and spoken with Ellis. He claimed no knowledge of anything unusual, said he'd already done a full cleaning of the cabin and found nothing. But the detective's tone changed when I asked if they'd looked under the floor. They had, and they found evidence that something or someone had been there. Bloodstains along the joists, strands of long dark hair, but no body, no remains. Whoever or whatever I had seen was gone. No official report was filed, no statement from Ellis. When I asked why, the detective paused and said quietly, "This isn't the first call we've gotten from that cabin." Then he hung up. That was the last anyone contacted us. The lodge's website was taken down a week later, and the photo on my camera disappeared 2 days after that. Leah doesn't ask about the cabin anymore. We don't talk about the photo or the smell or the sound I swore I heard beneath our feet. But something changed between us after that trip. We keep the lights on at night now. We don't stay in remote places. I catch myself tapping floorboards before I walk across them, like I'm checking for a heartbeat. And every so often, when I'm alone and the house is too quiet, I think about those eyes. Not the fear in them, the stillness, the way they seemed to wait, as if they knew someone would find them eventually. Maybe they were trying to be found. Maybe they never left at all. Some nights I dream of that face. But in the dream, it isn't dead. It's just listening, from beneath the floor, listening and waiting. Story 5. The Man with the Ranger Uniform. It was early fall when Mia and I decided to take a weekend camping trip to Zion. The summer crowds had thinned and the days were still warm enough to hike without jackets. We found a quiet spot at a first-come, first-served campground just off a dirt access road, little overgrown but perfect for what we wanted. No other tents in sight, just red cliffs in the distance and a wide stretch of cottonwoods lining the riverbed nearby. Mia called it peaceful. I called it lucky. We set up our tent by mid-afternoon, cooked over a small camp stove, and watched the sunset spill gold across the canyon walls. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel small in the best way. That night, the stars came out like glass scattered across the sky. We played cards by lantern light and crawled into our sleeping bags with the flap of the tent open to catch the breeze. Somewhere around midnight, I woke up to the sound of leaves crunching outside. 1 or 2 slow steps, then stillness. I held my breath listening. Then came a voice, calm, deep, just outside the tent. "Park ranger here. You folks awake in there?" I froze. Mia stirred beside me, half awake, whispering, "What did he say?" I repeated it quietly. "Park ranger here. You folks awake in there?" The voice came again, a little closer this time. "Everything all right. There's been some bear activity in the area, just checking on campers." Something about the way he spoke felt off. Too slow, too measured. I sat up and unzipped the inner flap just enough to see out through the mesh. A man stood about 10 feet away, outlined in the moonlight. He wore a brown jacket and pants, what looked like a ranger's uniform, and a wide-brimmed hat. But his stance was stiff. No flashlight, no badge I could see. Just a hand resting on his belt and something slung over his shoulder. I called out, "We didn't see any bears." "Everything's fine." He didn't respond right away. Then after a few seconds, he said, "Mind stepping out a moment so I can check your perimeter?" Mia sat up now, eyes wide. I said, "We're good, thanks. We'll report anything if we see it." Another long pause. Then the man turned slowly and walked into the trees without a word. No flashlight, no radio, just gone. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever. Mia whispered, "Do rangers normally patrol this late?" I shook my head. Not without lights. Not alone. Not like that. We zipped the tent shut and waited. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. And somewhere around 3 a.m., I thought I heard something again. Not footsteps. Breathing. Just outside the canvas. Shallow. Slow. Close. At first I thought I was imagining it. I lay there, frozen eyes wide open, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. But it wasn't. The breathing was too steady, too human. I reached for my phone, but of course we had no service. Mia grabbed my wrist and mouthed, "Do you hear it?" I nodded. We stayed that way for almost a minute, barely breathing ourselves, until the sound finally faded. When morning came, we unzipped the tent and stepped out into the gray light. The air was cool, silent. Nothing looked disturbed, no broken branches, no tracks. But as I walked around to the side of the tent, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Pressed into the soft dirt just a few feet from where our heads had been was a partial boot print. Deep, wide tread. The kind issued by park staff. But there was only one. No trail of prints leading in or out. Just that single step. Like someone had stood there for a long time, watching. And then vanished. I didn't say anything to Mia. Not yet. But in that moment, I knew we weren't the only ones who had spent the night at that site. We packed quickly that morning, neither of us saying much. Mia kept glancing toward the trees while I rolled up the tent with shaky hands. I wanted to believe it was just a weird ranger doing a late-night patrol, maybe someone new or inexperienced. But that didn't explain the missing flashlight, the empty badge spot, or the way he simply disappeared. Before we left, I walked a few yards into the woods in the direction he had gone. The ground was soft from last week's rain. It should have held more tracks, but there was nothing. No path, no prints, just untouched pine needles and silence. We drove back down the access road and stopped at the main ranger station near the park entrance. Inside, a woman in a green uniform greeted us with a polite smile. I asked if rangers had been doing night patrols near the river campgrounds. Her expression changed. She asked when and where. I told her. She looked at her clipboard, then back at me. "Sir, she said we haven't sent anyone out to that section in over a week. We've been short-staffed, and the only ranger assigned to that route is on leave until next Monday." Mia asked if someone else could have gone unofficially, maybe just to check for bears. The woman shook her head. "Absolutely not. No ranger would ever patrol without a radio flashlight or identification. That's against protocol. I showed her the boot print photo I had taken. She stared at it, then excused herself and stepped into a back office. When she returned, she asked us to fill out a report and then gave us a number to call if we remembered anything else. We got in the car and drove in silence. But as we pulled onto the highway, I glanced in the side mirror. Something glinted in the backseat window. A single strand of dark green fabric stuck to the corner of the tent bag, frayed, rough, like it had been torn off a uniform. One we never saw clearly. One that never should have been there. Later that week, a park officer from the investigations unit called us. He had reviewed our report and wanted to follow up. He asked for every detail of the voice, the uniform, the exact location of our site. When I mentioned the breathing outside the tent and the single boot print, there was a pause on the line. Then he asked if we still had the torn fabric. I said yes and mailed it to the station. A few days later, he called again. The fabric didn't match any current Ranger-issued material. In fact, it hadn't been used since the early 2000s. That would make the uniform at least 20 years out of date. He admitted that we weren't the first to report someone posing as a ranger, and there had been 2 other complaints in the past 6 months. Same area, same behavior, no identification, no light, always appearing late at night, always vanishing without a trace. They had no suspects, no name. Just an internal warning now listed in the system: do not approach Night Ranger if unverified. Whatever that meant, it didn't sound like standard procedure. It sounded like something they were afraid to put into writing. We haven't gone camping since. Mia sold her tent 2 weeks after we got back and won't even hike past sunset anymore. I still find myself checking the seams of my gear for fabric, for signs that someone touched it while we slept. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that same voice outside my window, low calm, asking if everything's all right. I know it's not real, but it feels close. Too close. I keep wondering why he chose us, or if it was a choice at all. Maybe he was always there waiting for whoever showed up next. Just part of the woods now. Not a ranger, not a man. Just a presence that wears the right clothes and says the right words. The thing that knocks at night and knows exactly what to say to make you unzip your tent. Story 6. The fake roadblock in the desert. We were driving through the Arizona desert on the 3rd day of our road trip, headed from Colorado to San Diego. It was just me, my wife Elena, and our 5-year-old son Mateo. The plan was to take the scenic route, avoid the interstates, and make a few stops at national monuments along the way. That evening, we had just passed a dusty little town with a single gas station and a diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the road, and Elena was asleep in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window. Mateo had finally dozed off in the back after hours of playing with a plastic dinosaur and watching the desert roll by. We hadn't seen another car in miles. No cell signal, just wide open space, red rock, and silence. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt out there, how free. The kind of quiet that makes you forget how far from help you really are. Then, just after we passed a faded mile marker, I saw 2 blinking red lights ahead. Low to the ground, stationary, and blocking both lanes. As we got closer, I slowed down. The red lights weren't attached to any vehicle. They were 2 battery-powered flares set up on either side of the road, like a warning. Between them sat a dark-colored sedan, parked diagonally across both lanes, its front end facing the opposite direction. The driver's door was open. Next to it were 2 orange traffic cones placed neatly in the fading light. It didn't look like an accident. It looked arranged, deliberate. I eased the car to a crawl about 50 feet away and tapped the brakes. Elena stirred beside me and sat up, rubbing her eyes. "What's going on?" she asked. I kept my eyes on the car and said quietly, "I don't know yet." Just then, 2 figures stepped out from behind the stalled sedan. Both were men, maybe in their 20s, wearing hoodies and jeans. One of them raised a hand like he was trying to wave us down. I rolled my window down just an inch and called out, "You guys okay?" The man closest to us nodded. "Yeah, car trouble. Can you step out a sec? I just need a quick favor." Something about the way he said it made my skin go cold. Too casual, too smooth. I glanced in the side mirror and saw the other guy moving slowly toward the passenger side. Elena noticed too. Her hand went to Mateo's shoulder instinctively. I shook my head, rolled up the window, and whispered, "We're not stopping. Hold on." Then I dropped the car into reverse. The tires kicked up dust, and the guy in front stepped forward quickly, like he was about to grab the hood. But I didn't stop. I backed up fast, turned the wheel hard, and gunned it off the shoulder around the roadblock. Gravel flew behind us. They shouted something, but I didn't look back. Not yet. As we sped around the roadblock and back onto the highway, I checked the rearview mirror. One of the men was running after us, arms flailing, but he stopped after a few steps and stood in the middle of the road watching. The other just turned and walked calmly back toward the sedan. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. Neither did Elena. Then she finally spoke, her voice shaking. "That wasn't real, was it? That wasn't a real roadblock?" I nodded, jaw tight. It was staged. And if we had stopped, I don't know what would have happened. Mateo was wide awake now, confused, asking what was wrong. I told him it was just a flat tire back there. Nothing serious. Just a little bump in the road. But my hands wouldn't stop gripping the wheel. 10 minutes later, we reached a larger 2-lane highway and finally spotted another car heading the opposite direction. It was the first sign of normal life since the whole thing started. I pulled over at the next gas station, went inside, and asked the clerk if there had been any reports of trouble up the road. He looked at me, blinked slowly, then said, "Not that I've heard. But you're not the first one to ask." The clerk's words sank into me like a slow chill. Not the first one. I asked him what he meant, and he shrugged. A couple came through last month, same look on their faces as yours. Said there were cones and some guys trying to stop them. One of them even claimed someone chased their car for a while. I asked if anyone called the police. He hesitated. "I think someone did, but out here by the time anyone gets there, they're long gone. Folks tend to just keep moving." I walked back to the car, told Elena what I'd heard. She gripped the steering wheel, even though she wasn't driving. We debated going to the sheriff's office, but Mateo was exhausted, and we were still a few hours from any real town. I decided to report it in the morning. That night we stayed at a roadside motel, old place with buzzing lights and thin walls, but it had a door that locked and a front desk clerk who looked like he kept a shotgun behind the counter. It was enough. Elena showered while I sat by the window watching the lot. A dusty truck pulled in around midnight and parked 3 spots away. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the back bumper. There were orange streaks across it like it had scraped against a cone. I froze. The man who got out was wearing a hoodie, same build as the guy from the roadblock. But when he stepped into the light, I saw his face clearly older, probably in his 40s. Not the same man, but the same look. Calm, watching. He looked up at our window and met my eyes. I dropped the curtain fast. We didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, we packed and left without breakfast. I never saw him again, but I couldn't help but wonder. Was it a group? Was it bigger than just two guys on the road? Were they tracking people who hesitated, who looked vulnerable? Or did we just stumble into something we weren't meant to survive? We filed a report at a sheriff's office in a small town near the California border the next afternoon. The deputy on duty listened closely, took notes, and asked for every detailed vehicle description, what the men looked like, the exact location of the fake roadblock. When I mentioned the motel and the orange streaks on the truck, his expression changed. He nodded slowly and excused himself to the back office. A few minutes later, another officer came out and told us they had received similar reports over the past year, mostly from travelers taking the scenic route. Always remote highways, always the same setup. Cones, a stalled car, men asking for help. He said they believed it was part of a larger pattern, but they had no solid leads. No one had been hurt yet. But people had gone missing along those routes before. They thanked us for our report and promised to investigate. As we were leaving, the deputy added something that stuck with me. He said, if you see something that doesn't make sense out here, trust your gut. Out here, that's all you got. We made it to San Diego, but something had changed in all of us. Elena double-checked every lock at night. Mateo, once fearless, now asked if there were bad guys on every road. And I stopped taking the scenic routes. The open desert that once felt freeing now felt vast and predatory, like anything could hide out there and no one would ever know. I found myself replaying the moment over and over. What if I had stepped out of the car? What if I had rolled the window down just a little more? I still drive, but I avoid long isolated stretches. I keep my gas tank full and my phone charged. Because what scared me most wasn't the trap. It was how normal it looked, how easy it was to almost believe it, and how quickly everything could have ended if I had just made one wrong choice. Story 7. The car with something underneath. It was late September when I took a solo camping trip up in the Sawtooth Mountains of Idaho. I had just finished a rough project at work and needed space to think. I chose a remote site 2 hours from the nearest town, deep in pine country. The plan was simple. No phone, no laptop, just me, a tent, a fire pit, and silence. I arrived just before sunset, pitched my tent near a small creek, and cracked open a beer. The evening air was crisp and quiet, except for the occasional rustling of squirrels in the underbrush. As darkness settled in, I noticed something strange through the trees at the edge of my site. Parked off the dirt road, half hidden behind some shrubs, was a small gray car I hadn't seen when I arrived. No one had passed me on the way in. There were no other tents or signs of people nearby. The car sat completely still. No lights, no movement. I told myself someone might have parked there to hike or hunt. Still, it felt out of place. I went to bed a little uneasy, but reminded myself I was here to disconnect and not let my imagination take over. That worked until morning came. When I unzipped my tent the next morning, the car was still there. Same spot, same angle, like it hadn't moved at all. That might have reassured me, except for one thing. There were fresh drag marks in the dirt. They ran from the edge of the clearing down toward the vehicle, faint but visible in the morning light. Something heavy had been pulled through the pine needles and gravel, and it wasn't from my camp. I walked a little closer to the car, staying half covered by the trees. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, and there were no plates on either end. That made my gut tighten. I crouched and looked underneath from about 20 feet away. There was something there, A dark shape under the center of the car, too big to be a muffler or spare tire. It looked soft, like cloth or maybe even a person. I backed away slowly and returned to my camp heart racing. I hadn't seen anyone. No sounds, no movement. But the drag marks said someone had been here, and whatever was under that car hadn't been there last night. I packed my gear in minutes, abandoning breakfast and the peaceful morning I had planned. The deeper fear wasn't just what I had seen, but that whoever left the car might still be out here watching. Maybe they saw me notice. Maybe they were waiting to see what I would do next. That thought made my chest tighten. I needed to leave, but the only road out led right past that car, and I had the sick feeling I wouldn't be leaving unseen. I threw my gear into the back of the truck without bothering to fold anything. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the crunch of gravel under my boots, felt louder than it should have. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I kept my eyes on the tree line. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I started the engine and slowly backed out of my spot. The only way back to the highway meant driving directly past the gray car. As I approached, I slowed just enough to glance at it again. That shape beneath the car was still there, but this time I saw the edge of what looked like a jacket sleeve. Faded red. Human. Definitely human. My hands tightened on the wheel and I pressed the gas. I didn't stop, not to check, not to call out. I just drove. About a mile later, I got cell reception and called the sheriff's office reporting what I saw. They told me someone would check it out. I pulled into a rest stop another 20 minutes down and sat there, engine running, breath shallow. I'd gone out there to escape the noise. But now the silence was all I could hear. It was far more dangerous than I ever imagined. 15 minutes after I made the call, a deputy called me back. He asked for exact directions, coordinates if I had them, and any other details I could remember. I gave him everything, still pacing beside my truck at the rest stop, hands trembling. He said a unit would be dispatched immediately, and they'd update me if they found anything. I waited. Not because they told me to, but because part of me needed confirmation proof that I hadn't imagined it. 30 minutes later, the phone rang again. The deputy's voice was more serious this time. They had found the car. It was abandoned, no one around. But yes, there had been something underneath. A body. A young man, maybe in his 20s. No ID, no visible wounds. Just there. Left under the vehicle like he was being hidden or staged. They were treating it as suspicious, possibly foul play, and would need a full forensic team. He thanked me for reporting it and asked if I'd be willing to give a full statement at the ranger station. I drove there in silence, my thoughts racing. When I arrived, they took me into a small room and asked the same questions again, over and over. I told them everything. When did I first notice the car? Did I see anyone? Did I touch anything? I hadn't. But the more I talked, the more I began to question myself. What if the people who did this had seen me? What if I had left some trace behind without knowing? That night, I stayed in a motel just outside of town. I pushed a chair under the doorknob and barely slept. At 3 a.m., I swore I saw headlights pause in the parking lot before driving away. I couldn't prove it, but my instincts screamed that someone had followed me. That body had been left there for a reason, and I had seen something I was never meant to. The next morning, I returned to the ranger station to follow up. The lead investigator met me in the lot, his face unreadable. He said they had traced the vehicle to a rental company, reported stolen 3 days before it showed up at my campsite. No fingerprints, no personal belongings, No camera footage from nearby trails or roadways. The body remained unidentified, no missing persons report that matched. It was as if the young man had never existed beyond that moment under the car. They thanked me for my cooperation, but made it clear there was nothing more they could share for now. I asked if I was in danger. The investigator didn't answer directly. He just told me to stay alert, and if I noticed anything unusual, anyone watching any vehicle lingering near my home, to call them immediately. I nodded, but the chill in my spine had already made that decision for me. I wasn't just leaving a mountain. I was leaving something unfinished. Something that, for all I knew, was still out there watching the people who watched it. Weeks passed, but the unease never left. I stopped camping after that. The woods no longer felt like a place of peace. Every shadow near my house made me pause. Every unfamiliar car on my street set my nerves on edge. I'd always believed that nature was neutral, that the wilderness was only dangerous if you disrespected it. But this wasn't about the forest. It was about people. About something calculated and cruel being left in the middle of nowhere, knowing someone like me would find it. I kept checking the news, hoping for updates. There were none. The story disappeared as quickly as it had entered my life. Sometimes I wonder if it was a message, not to law enforcement, but to whoever it was really meant for. And I was just a witness, an accident. But deep down, I fear that witnessing it made me part of something much darker than I'll ever understand. Story 8. The cabin key that wasn't ours. It was supposed to be the perfect winter getaway. My girlfriend and I had booked a secluded cabin in northern Vermont, nestled deep in the Green Mountains. We wanted something quiet and isolated, a place to unplug and recharge before the new year. The listing promised snowy views, a wood-burning stove, and no neighbors for miles. It sounded ideal. After a long drive through winding back roads and icy forest trails, we finally arrived just before dusk. The air was crisp, and the trees stood like silent guardians around the small log cabin. The key had been left for us under a flower pot by the front steps, just like the owner said. We opened the door and stepped into a cozy, dimly lit space. There was a folded note on the kitchen table welcoming us and reminding us where the firewood was stored. Everything seemed in order. We unpacked, made hot cocoa, and settled in for what we hoped would be a peaceful week. But that night, while digging through the drawers for a lighter, I found a second key, identical to the one we used to get in, except this one was buried in the back of a drawer, and it wasn't supposed to be there. At first, I didn't think much of the second key. Maybe the owner had left a spare, I told myself. Still, something about the way it was hidden felt off. It wasn't labeled, and it was tucked behind some old takeout menus and an empty matchbox. I showed it to my girlfriend, and she shrugged, brushing it off as a backup. But that night, something kept me awake. Around 1 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps outside. Soft crunches in the snow, like someone moving slowly across the front yard. I got up and peeked through the curtains, but saw nothing. Just the moonlit trees and untouched powder. I told myself it was just an animal. But in the morning, when I stepped out to grab more firewood, I noticed fresh tracks, human-sized, leading from the tree line directly to the porch and then stopping. No return path. No sign of someone leaving. I didn't mention it at first. I didn't want to freak her out. But that day, I triple-checked the doors and windows. I even wedged a chair under the front doorknob when we went to bed. She laughed at me, called me paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. That someone knew we were there, that someone had a key just like ours and might be waiting for the right moment to use it. On the third night, the silence broke. We were lying in bed, the fire crackling low, when a soft metallic sound echoed from the front door. It was unmistakable, the sound of a key turning in the lock. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked toward the living room. The doorknob twitched, then stopped. No knock, no voice, just silence again. My girlfriend whispered my name, frozen beside me. I grabbed the fireplace poker and crept slowly toward the door. Through the peephole, I saw nothing. No figure, no movement. But the tracks in the snow told a different story. There were new prints, fresh ones leading right up to the threshold. They hadn't been there an hour ago. I opened the door quickly and swung the poker out, but no one was there. Just cold air and the deep dark of the forest. We didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the wood, every gust of wind made us flinch. We took turns keeping watch, listening for footsteps, waiting for the key to turn again. But it never did. At least not that night. The next day, we decided to call the cabin owner. I told him about the second key and the footsteps, expecting maybe an apology or an explanation. But his tone shifted instantly. He sounded confused and then tense. He swore there was only one key, the one left under the flower pot. He hadn't given a spare to anyone. When I mentioned the tracks and the noise at the door, there was a long pause on the line. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. That cabin's been broken into before. I never told guests because it happened off-season. But if there's a second key, someone must have made a copy. That night, we made a plan. We wouldn't leave yet, not without answers. So we rigged a simple trap fishing line across the porch, tied with a bell from one of our backpacks. Around midnight, we heard it. A faint ting of the bell in the windless stillness. I grabbed the flashlight and the poker again and opened the door in one motion. The light swept the yard, nothing. But the line was snapped clean. And just beyond the edge of the porch, another set of footprints, standing still, facing the cabin. I moved fast this time, stepping into the snow, scanning the trees. That's when I saw him. A man partially hidden behind a pine, wearing a heavy winter coat and watching silently. I shouted. He didn't move. My girlfriend called the police from inside. The man just stood there. Then calmly he turned and walked back into the trees without a word. The police didn't arrive until nearly 2 hours later. By then the forest had swallowed him. They found nothing, no campsite, no vehicle, no ID, just footprints. And in one of them, a copy of the same exact key we had found. Same brand, same label. Only scratched in were 2 initials, not ours. The police took the key and the footprints seriously, but their expressions made it clear they had seen stranger things out here. One officer pulled me aside and asked if we had noticed anything missing or tampered with inside. We hadn't. Not a single thing. The cabin looked untouched. Too untouched. Almost like someone had been watching, not trying to break in, just waiting. They searched the perimeter with dogs and flashlights, but the trail ended abruptly about 200 yards into the woods, right where the snow got shallow near a ravine. No tire marks, no shelter, nothing. Before leaving, one deputy told us quietly that 2 years ago, another couple had reported similar events at a nearby cabin, footstep sounds at night, and an extra key that no one could explain. That case went cold. They never found the man. We packed up that morning and left without looking back. The cabin owner refunded us in full and promised to change the locks. But we both knew it wasn't about the lock anymore. Someone out there had been inside before we arrived, watching, maybe even choosing. It's been 6 months since that trip, but I still double lock every door at night. My girlfriend wakes up at the slightest noise now, and we haven't gone near a cabin or a forest trail since. What rattles me the most isn't the man we saw or even the key we found. It's the thought that he might have been inside before we ever arrived. That he knew our names from the rental paperwork. That he picked that cabin not for shelter, but for us. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't set that trap, if we had slept through the bell, if we hadn't opened the door in time. The police never followed up. No new leads, just a warning to avoid that stretch of woods. We listen, and every time I see a key now, even my own, I check twice. Because once in a quiet cabin, the key we trusted didn't belong to us, and someone else knew it. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.